Okay, so let's start with a big what if. What if the decision to go to war wasn't actually made based only on a country's own best interests? It's a heavy thought, right? And that's exactly what we're diving into today, a really critical analysis of this tangled relationship between the US, Israel, and Iran. And it all boils down to one tough question. Who's really influencing the path to a potential conflict?
And look, this quote, this isn't from some random pundit on cable news. We're talking about Joe Kent, the former director of the National Counterterrorism Center. That's a serious position. So when he says something like this, it's pretty shocking. And this accusation, it cuts right to the heart of what this whole explainer is about. This idea that the decision for war could be influenced more by outside lobbying than by America's own internal strategy. So a quote like that, it just forces you to step back and ask a really fundamental question. I mean, we all kind of assume that it's our elected officials, our military leaders, who make that ultimate call. But what if there are other, less visible forces at play here? That's exactly what we're going to dig into. All right, so to really get our heads around this argument, we have to go back to the one event that really ripped this whole debate out into the open. It all starts with a pretty shocking resignation, right from the highest levels of government.
Yeah, so Joe Kent, we're talking a decorated veteran. He didn't just pack up his desk and quietly retire. No way. He resigned, and he did it loudly, on principle. His claim that America's entire strategy toward Iran was being steered not from within, but by outside pressure. And to be specific, the source material points to pro-Israel advocacy groups as that source of pressure. Okay, so before we can really unpack a claim that big, we have to get the lay of the land. Because this isn't a simple A versus B situation. You've got to think of it more like a really tense geopolitical triangle with three key players who all want very, very different things. And this table here, it just lays out the problem perfectly. On one side, you have Israel, who looks at Iran's nuclear program and sees an existential threat, something that justifies taking preemptive action. Then you've got Iran, who insists, hey, this is just for civilian energy, for deterrence. And then, caught right in the middle, is the US, trying to juggle its goals of preventing nuclear weapons, supporting a key ally, and, desperately trying to avoid another massive war in the Middle East. So, how did things get so heated? Well, this timeline shows you the dominoes falling, one by one. It really kicks off in 2018 when the US pulls out of the Iran nuclear deal. That starts this whole maximum pressure campaign of sanctions. The idea was to squeeze Iran, right? To force them to change course. But what actually happened was the opposite. Iran sped up its uranium enrichment, and just a few years later, the whole region is at a boiling point, with serious talk of military action on the table. Okay, so that brings us to the big question. How does this alleged influence actually work? According to the analysis we're looking at, it's not as simple as one person making a phone call to the White House. It's much more subtle, more systemic. Think of it as a process with a few different coordinated parts. And the source material really breaks it down into three main channels. First up, you've got good old-fashioned political lobbying. We're talking millions of dollars spent to shape opinions in Congress, making it politically risky for anyone to step out of line. Second, there's the battle for the narrative, using think tanks and media to frame Iran constantly as a rogue regime, an imminent threat. And third, there's intelligence sharing. Now, that collaboration can be super valuable, for sure, but it can also create a kind of echo chamber where both sides start from the same assumptions and potentially miss the bigger picture. And this quote here from Professor James Lynn, man, it just nails the core issue. The point isn't that Israel has influence. Of course it does. That's how international relations works. The real question, the critical one, is about balance. Is that influence just one factor being weighed against America's own strategic interests? Or has the scale tipped? Is that influence starting to override America's interests? All right, so let's bring this all back to the real world. Why does any of this matter? Because this isn't some academic debate, The stakes of a potential war are absolutely astronomical, with huge real-world consequences for everyone. I mean, the analysis is crystal clear on this. A war wouldn't stay neat and tidy. It could unleash total chaos, with Iran activating its proxies all across the Middle East. It could send a massive shockwave through the global economy, especially with 20% of the world's oil passing through the Strait of Hormuz. And here's the biggest irony of all. A war fought to stop Iran from getting a bomb might be the very thing that convinces them they absolutely need one to survive. So the cost isn't just in dollars or lives. It's also about a potential collapse of U.S. credibility around the world. And that leaves us with a really profound final question. And it's not just about foreign policy.
It's about the nature of democracy itself. In a world full of powerful alliances and intense lobbying, can our nation, truly pursue its own interests with complete clarity and independence? And maybe even more important, what does it mean for all of us if the answer to that question is no? That's really the question at the very heart of this entire debate.